do. Glad to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me say good afternoon to you. Welcome you to this last session for our HBCU Story Symposium. And this particular segment is going to deal with the HBCU sports and wellness. And so we have two panelists today. Let us welcome them. A round of applause. We have Kenyatta Cavill, a graduate of Prairie View A&M University, College of Engineering, and also the Whitlow R. Green College of Education. Continued his education at Texas Southern University, where he received his MBA, and his ED from Texas Southern's College of Education. Dr. Cavill has his postgraduate studies in sports management from Sam Houston State University. We're also joined by Ms. Stewart, who is the community coordinator for the Fisk Meharry Medical College HBCU Wellness Project. She received her Master of Science in Public Health from the the School of Graduate Studies at Meharry Medical College, and has a Bachelor's of Arts in Biology from Fisk University. So we welcome them, and I was told just to introduce you all and step away. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I'd like to say good evening. No, it's late. We got a little behind schedule, so good evening. We've been here all day. But I'm going to see if we can get some discussion here in regards to the HBCU sports tradition, the descriptive analysis of HBCU athletic programs. And as you know, we have 105 HBCUs now. We moved just to 106 with the agreement in the launch of American Baptist College this past week, and them gaining their recognition, and I applaud them for all the work, obviously, they had to put in to do that. So now this study can be adopted for that, but I want to let you know that at this point we were looking at 105 institutions. As President Sherrill talked about, one of the questions I was going to ask him, when you look at the community basis, and one of the reasons for this study is to understand the huge economic and social perspective that sports plays in our community, particularly for African American young men. And so oftentimes we look at the educational component, but we do not look at sport or what the role of sport plays in it. It was so important to me to look at this. Not only did I complete the study, but I had the opportunity to actually create a sports studies and leadership program at Texas Southern University, leading to the Bachelor of Science in Sports Management. So that is the impetus for this study in terms of where we're going, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to speak before you with that. So let's go back from a historical standpoint. What does that mean? When you first look at the history, you have this game in 1892, December 27th, between Livingston College and Biddle College. Now we know Biddle as Johnson C. Smith University, which played in its first inaugural game, was won by Biddle College 5-0. But this was 27 years after the first conception of a football game was played in our country. But it lets you know from a historical standpoint how embracing and how we are in terms of understanding the nature of sport, particularly football, within our community. So if we look at all these different components and trying to figure out how we're going to successfully move our programs forward, it is important that we look at all the different paradigms that are in this perspective. So it's been my life lessons to continue to look at sport. But not only sport in terms of what we do on the field, but understanding sports in terms of what we do off the field, in terms of understanding the business and the true business of sport from economic, financial, and management and leadership position. So that's really what this is. This is more than just ESPN and talking sports. It is talking business from a perspective that happens to influence HBCUs and African Americans. And really, when you start opening up the lens, you look at it from an Africana diaspora across the Caribbean and therefore across the world, because we're not just in the United States, but we're all over from a global perspective. So we need to understand the changing of the guard and what it means to be a part of sport, but not just sport in term on the field. As I said again, we're talking about the business of sport. So looking at that, we will not ignore our history components that allowed us to get excited about that. And so these are some of the coaches, not an exhaustive list of all the coaches, and do not want to leave anybody out, but understanding some of the pioneers that not only were pioneers in terms of HBCUs, but pioneers in cultivating sport from a tactical perspective and taught their colleagues that they may not always get credit for when we look at the game that they play, both football and basketball. And that doesn't mean I'm just focusing on these sports, but time does not elude me to give you this exhaustive list from what we got in baseball in terms of Roger Cador over there at Southern, and he just named to the Major League Diversity Committee in terms of SWAC. We also have soccer in terms of Howard University and what they were able to do to win one of the HBCU's first championships ever in the sport of soccer, and how it was connected with a lot of players, not just from the United States, but from the Caribbean and from Africa. And actually, it was sanctioned, and that first championship was stripped because of that. And later they came back the next year and won it on the field, and they could not strip it again. But those are the historical perspective of understanding these games that we play and like to cheer and have fun of, but we need to understand what does that mean, the lacrosse, when you look at the Morgan Bears in terms of the lacrosse team, the swimming sports that we have had a lot of success in across these landscapes, and if you would. So let's move over and look at just the conferences with the purpose that we're looking at. We have the SWAC, 1920, the MEAC, in terms of 1970, the two Division I HBCU conferences. You have the historical framework from the CIAA and all the history that started there in 1912, SIAC in terms of the SIG in 1913, in terms of the history that it continues, and many of the schools that were in the SWAC and the MEAC were part of the CIAA and SIAC. And now we have the historical Gulf Coast Athletic Conference that I won't let you forget about, that have a lot of the NAIA schools, and actually was a mixture between HBCUs and traditionally non-HBCU programs that, for whatever reason, many of those non-HBCU programs left. So they had to expand themselves, and now they become what I see as the fifth HBCU conference, because it's made up of all other conferences, and obviously the independent programs that are member of non-HBCU conferences, including all the way up to Tennessee State and Ohio Valley Conference, all the way down to the Red River Athletic Conference in the NAIT. Many of the Paul Quinn is a member of that we just heard about, as well as Houston Tillerson, Wiley College, Texas College, to name a few. But the purpose was to provide an overview of each institution's athletic programs and characteristics such as the athletic program's operating membership alignment, number of sports, and classification level. We wanted to see this framework so we could see where conferences are operating their programs, where they may need to operate their programs, because the next composite study actually looked at this from a financial component and an economic component from our neighborhood. But we had to start somewhere. So the first study was just descriptive in nature. We wanted to determine the difference between HBCU programs based on the athletic program's operating membership. Where were they located in terms of where they played their conference sports? So the research questions were, which athletic programs' operation memberships alignment are most common in HBCUs? Which athletic programs' operating membership alignment are least common in HBCUs? As well as what is the difference, if any, exists between public and private institutions? And what difference, if any, exists based on the classification level, school in which the athletic programs are members? What differences, finally, if any, exist based on the size of the institution in which sports are played? Again, this was a basic descriptive study that gave us first a ground level of where we can continue to get many of our studies to understand what is next. So the literature came from the Carnegie Foundation that give us a lot of our information in terms of size, academic status, and things of that nature. Obviously, we use the U.S. Department of Education to give us that information. The U.S. regional map to find regionality of location, the history of sports in the U.S., looked at size, status, whether there's public or private, regional location, and athletic membership, whether you're a member of the NCAA Division I, Division II, NIA Division I, or NCAA Division III, if you would. Also, we dove as much as well as also the affiliation in terms of Catholic, in terms of Christianity, conference affiliation. And this was done with the population of 105 HBCUs. We looked at the quantitative analysis in terms of descriptive and qualitative analysis, in terms of a chi-square analysis, in terms of the significance of what was going on. This is a list of your 105 HBCUs categorized by U.S. state territories, where are they located across, and designated between public and private with a total number so you can see where it is. And this obviously goes all the way out to U.S. Virgin Islands, where our lone HBCU is outside of the continental U.S., to give you a layout of where HBCUs are located by state. When we look at the percentage, we talk about a four-year public. We're talking about 38% of HBCUs, the 105 that we looked at, were public. 4-year public institutions. In terms of the 2-year public, we had an N of 11 with 10%. In terms of 4-year private, you're looking at 51 at 49%, and 2-year private, you're looking at 3%, giving you a breakdown in terms of that. This is also a broader perspective when we look at the significance of these institutions in terms of size. And we did the size based on the Carnegie classification of where they classify these institutions in terms of large, 4-year, medium, all the way down to unknown or very small 2-year classifications versus public and private, operational membership and versus NCAA Division I. And you notice we do not have any institutions that operate at the highest level in sports in terms of FBS, where the television dollars are growing and where all the money attributed to operating sports, which becomes a very serious question when you start understanding HBCUs and the funding mechanism of HBCUs, which is at most our institution goes all the way at the Division I level at least from 49% to 78% is off the back of students. Many of these students are on financial aid and different issues like this. So a serious question needs to be answered when we follow up these studies in terms of what is the appropriate level to operate your athletic program and who is responsible for paying that cost. Then we look at it in terms of region, and the region, I guess, obviously is from the U.S. Census in terms of regionality, and so you start to see where institutions are regionally. We know by the history that most of them would be out of the southeast, but we do have some in the southwest, all the way down the Caribbean and Central Plains in terms of the Great Lakes as well, when you look at the regionality of where institutions are located. When we look at a particular sport, we want to look at football, which is very popular, obviously, as we looked at the history of it. Where are these institutions? Who are playing these institutions? And when I went to do this data, we had a lot of information on HBCUs, a lot of information in terms of education, but very little on terms of football and where they actually play sports in general, football and basketball as well. So I wanted to break that down. When you look at 4-year public institutions that have football, you had 33 institutions with football at 58%, nearly 59%. 2-year public institutions, there were 2 in terms of 3.6%, and 4-year private, a number of 20, 35.7%, nearly 36% if you would, and 2-year private, 1%, almost 2% in terms of that. And that was the end of 56 in terms of the total number of football programs operating that were HBCU. Now, what about basketball, another popular sport? And obviously in basketball, you start to look at the fact that you offer this oftentimes both for men's and women. So what does it look like when you strip it down in terms of public institutions all the way to 2-year private? 4-year public, 39. So you see basically the end should be pretty much equal for the Title IX. Obviously one of the issues here you start to look at in terms of the fact that you do have some HBCUs that only service one particular gender in terms of Morehouse, Bennett College associated. 2-year public, you see even at 8. And then 4-year private, 44 and 45. 2-year private, you see 1 on each, both in terms of men's and women. Total number for men are 92. Total number for women are 94. Again, that's associated with the fact that you have Spelman as well in terms of institutions that service a particular gender. Now, baseball, you start stripping down a little more and you start to see when we had this question about the question in terms of Major League Baseball and their diversity initiative and some of the support I've done with them, you start asking the questions. Well, you look at the number, you start to see quickly one of the issues is is the fact that you just don't have a lot of college programs playing it. Now, again, when you start looking at issues, I'm very cognizant from the standpoint that it's usually not just one issue. It's a multiple issues, and if we get focused on just trying to solve an issue in terms of one particular problem, we usually miss the point. We need to make sure that we look at all the different lenses that create these problems. But for this particular study, descriptive analysis in terms of four-year public was 27, two-year 6, four-year private 45, and there were no baseball programs that were two-year private institutions. So you see from the number of football and basketball, when you go up to 40 and 50, and then you start seeing that you drop all the way down to 27, that tells you something about the fact when you look at those initiatives. So when they come and ask these questions, you can provide this type of information and see what are some funding sources to change this if you wanted to look at different ways